I still remember the exact second when my world cracked open. The elegant ballroom sparkled with chandeliers, glasses clinked and the air smelled faintly of champagne and polished wood. But when my eyes landed on that cream place card, the words written in perfect calligraphy nearly stopped my heart. Pathetic gold digger nobody. Laughter swelled around me like a wave. Some people gasped, but most smirked, unable to resist the spectacle. A woman's voice, sharp mocking, cut through the room. Still clinging to him after all this time. Their chuckles grew louder, overlapping cruel. I felt every syllable stab into me as though the ink itself had been etched with venom, meant only for me. And Ryan, my husband, my so-called partner, just sat there. He didn't rise, didn't protest, didn't shield me from the humiliation. He stared into his water glass as though it might reveal the meaning of life if he only looked hard enough. His silence was not surprise, it was complicity. I wanted him to meet my eyes, to show me one flicker of outrage, to let me believe the man I'd once loved so completely still lived inside him. But he couldn't even give me that. The Ryan I'd supported through lean years and late nights, the man I had sacrificed my own rising career for, was gone. My hands trembled as I picked up that card, but inside me something solidified. I wasn't pathetic. I wasn't a nobody. The woman they laughed at had skills they couldn't begin to imagine, and Tyler Jameson, the woman who orchestrated this cruel spectacle, had just made the worst mistake of her career. I walked out with my head held high, the room still roaring behind me. On my way out, I passed the CEO herself, her lips curled in amusement. I leaned in close, letting my whisper slice the air like a knife. I'd check your stock prices if I were you. The taxi ride home was silent except for the sound of my own muffled sobs. The driver kept glancing at me in the mirror, probably wondering what kind of rich man's wife ended up crying alone in an evening gown. I pressed my forehead against the cool window glass, watching the glittering lights smear into blurred lines. Ryan didn't come home that night. Maybe he was still at the gala laughing with Tyler, or maybe he was celebrating my destruction. Either way, it didn't matter, because the woman he thought he'd silenced was about to come back louder than ever. The next morning, I sat in my home office, the one space still truly mine. The house felt smaller, almost like it was folding in on me, but my desk was freedom. My laptop waited, its black screen reflecting a woman who looked hollow but whose eyes still burned. I saw the version of myself I used to be, the woman who had once saved pension funds from fraud, who had exposed corporate lies, who had been quoted in financial publications because she saw what others couldn't. My fingers moved almost instinctively across the keys, passwords unlocking doors I thought I'd closed forever. Bloomberg Terminal, SEC filings, databases I'd kept active just in case. The thrill of recognition coursed through me like a forgotten drug. I was home again, and within the first hour I found it. Reinhardt Tech, the darling of the industry, Ryan's company, Tyler's empire was rotting beneath the glitter. Executive stock options timed too perfectly with announcements. Revenue numbers shuffled around like cards in a magician's hands. R&D costs that slipped in and out of categories without explanation. It was sloppy, arrogant, the kind of fraud only people drunk on their own power commit. Tyler's signature was everywhere. I smiled for the first time in weeks. She thought she'd destroyed me, but I had just found her Achilles heel. 3 days later, under the anonymous username EquityWatchdog47, I posted my first analysis on a well-known investor forum, Red Flags at Reinhardt Tech, a deep dive. It wasn't speculation, it was evidence. Charts, citations, comparisons, every detail airtight. I knew how to make professionals sit up and take notice, and I knew how to plant seeds of doubt that could grow into avalanches. By noon, the post was everywhere, shared across forums, dissected in financial blogs, whispered about in analyst chats. And that evening, my secure inbox lit up. Whoever you are, thank you. I've suspected for months. Here's proof. Signed, a concerned insider. Attached were internal emails, meeting notes, direct quotes from Tyler herself. Shift the costs to next quarter and announce the beta release Friday. That'll give the stock a nice bump right before the options vest. And Tyler's reply, perfect. The board won't question it if the numbers look good. The evidence was gold and damning. The next morning, I published again. This time, not just numbers culture. The messages Tyler had sent to Ryan about me, the cruel screenshots from the gala shared in company Slack. Did you see Rebecca's face when she found her place card priceless? Mission accomplished. Her arrogance was her undoing. By Friday, Reinhardt tech stock had dropped 12%. By the weekend, 18%. News outlets picked up the storm. Regulators announced preliminary inquiries. Investors began pulling out in waves. Tyler's empire, built on cruelty and false confidence, was crumbling. And I was alive again. I watched from my home office, sipping coffee, while news alerts flooded my phone. Employees began sending me their stories. A junior accountant confessed Tyler had bullied him into manipulating quarter-end numbers, but he'd been too afraid to speak until now. My posts had given him courage to go to the SEC. Each message I received reminded me I wasn't just exposing fraud. I was giving people a voice. By Monday morning, the Wall Street Journal called. Their investigative team had verified my findings. They wanted to run a front-page exposé. And they did, naming Tyler 17 times, each sentence more devastating than the last. By 10 a.m., Reinhardt Tech's stock had plunged again, trading halted twice from the sheer volume of panic. And at 11:47 a.m., the headline flashed across my screen: Reinhardt Tech executive Tyler Jamison placed on administrative leave pending investigation. I saved the screenshot under a folder named Justice Served. And that was only the beginning. When Ryan walked through the front door that Monday afternoon, I barely recognized him. His shoulders were slumped, his suit wrinkled, his eyes darting with the haunted look of a man who'd seen the foundation beneath him begin to crumble. He dropped his briefcase by the entrance, a small gesture, but one that told me everything. Ryan never left things out of place. Rebecca, he said, his voice trembling, we need to talk. I looked up from my laptop where I had been tracking Reinhardt Tech's free-falling stock. The numbers plummeted down the screen like stones sinking into water, each point a reminder of the storm I had unleashed. Calmly, I minimized the window and turned to face him. What about? I asked, my tone clipped, controlled. About Tyler. About the investigation. About everything. He ran both hands down his face, the lines of stress carving deeper with each movement. It's bad, really bad. His desperation should have made me feel pity, but instead it only illuminated the distance that now yawned between us. The man standing before me wasn't the partner I'd once rehearsed job interview answers with in our cramped college apartment. This was someone who had willingly watched me humiliated and stayed silent. What kind of bad? I pressed. The SEC is launching a formal investigation. The FBI seized documents from Tyler's office this morning. There are whispers about criminal charges. Rebecca. He hesitated, his voice cracking. My career could be over. Everything I've worked for it could all disappear. He leaned forward, reaching for my hand across the desk. I pulled it back before his fingers could touch mine. His eyes flickered with hurt, but I didn't flinch. I need your expertise, he pleaded. You're the smartest person I know when it comes to financial analysis. Would you help me? Just help me understand what they might be looking for? The irony nearly made me laugh. Months earlier, my insight had been reduced to hobbies and little projects. At dinner parties, I had been the amusing footnote to his real accomplishments. And now, when the walls were closing in, suddenly my dismissed skills had value again. Why would you need my help? I asked coolly. Doesn't Tyler have everything under control? Ryan's bitter laugh rang hollow. Tyler's unraveling. She's blaming everyone but herself. But Rebecca. His voice dropped lower, almost breaking. Some of the documentation. I think she manipulated the numbers deliberately. If that comes out, anyone tied to her could be implicated. That includes me. I studied his face, creased with worry, eyes darting, voice filled with panic. For a fleeting second, the old instinct to comfort him tugged at me. But the memory of that night at the gala, of his silence while I stood alone, humiliated, burned hotter. You chose your mentor over your wife, I said finally. He blinked, confusion flashing across his features. What? You stopped listening to me years ago. You stopped respecting me. You stopped defending me. And then you stood by while Tyler orchestrated my destruction in front of everyone. His face went pale. Rebecca, if this is about the gala, it's about everything. I cut him off. My voice rose sharp with years of suppressed rage. The Gala was just the exclamation point on a sentence you started writing years ago when you decided her voice mattered more than mine. I opened my desk drawer and slid a manila folder across the surface. Inside were apartment listings, preliminary consultations with divorce attorneys, and a signed contract with a hedge fund worth more than Ryan's annual salary. "What is this?" His voice cracked. "My exit strategy," I said evenly. "While you were busy letting Tyler rewrite our marriage, I was rebuilding myself." His hands trembled as he flipped through the documents. "You're leaving me." "I'm saving myself." The words landed like a thunderclap in the room. For a moment, the only sound was the quiet hum of my laptop. "But what about us?" he whispered. "What about everything we built?" I stared at him, searching for even a trace of the man I had once trusted. "When did you last treat me as a partner, Ryan? When did you last ask for my opinion on anything important? When did you last defend me? When someone dismissed my expertise?" His silence was answer enough. Slowly, I began packing. Folded shirts, blouses, trousers, all slipping into the suitcase with the same clinical precision I once applied to financial spreadsheets. Ryan watched from the edge of the bed, small and broken, whispering excuses. "I know I should have said something at the gala. Tyler told me it was just a joke that you'd understand." I stopped folding and turned to face him fully. "You knew about the place card in advance." His eyes widened, his silence confirmed everything. "She showed it to you before the event, didn't she? And you still let me walk into that room blind." Ryan lowered his head. "She said it would be funny. She said we'd laugh about it later." A hollow laugh escaped me. "Did you really believe that? Or did you just not care enough to stop it?" He had no answer. By the time my suitcase was zipped, the truth was carved between us like a canyon. On the kitchen counter, I left the note I had been writing in my head for weeks. "Ryan, it wasn't the insult that broke us. It was the silence that followed. The woman you dismissed is the same woman who just brought down your mentor's empire. Maybe next time you'll remember that underestimating people has consequences." When I walked out of the house, suitcase rolling behind me, it felt like sunlight breaking through years of shadow. My phone buzzed with a news alert: former Reinhardt executive Tyler Jameson under criminal investigation for securities fraud. I smiled to myself. The equity watchdog was wide awake now. The apartment I moved into that week was nothing like the house I'd left behind. It wasn't large, but it was mine. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the city skyline, the kind of view that whispered possibility each morning as sunlight spilled across the hardwood floors. No shared history, no echoes of arguments, no memories of betrayal. 9 years of marriage fit into 6 boxes. That fact should have hurt more than it did. Instead, it felt liberating. I hung my diplomas on the wall of my new home office, my PhD in financial analysis, my certifications, the awards from industry associations that had once recognized my talent before I buried it for the sake of Ryan's career. For the first time in years, they were reminders not of sacrifice, but of survival. "Welcome back," I whispered to my reflection in the mirror that first night. The woman staring back had straighter shoulders, clearer eyes, a mouth set in determination rather than apology. 2 days later, my phone rang with an unfamiliar number. "Rebecca, this is Patricia Morrison from Whitfield Capital. We've been following your work, especially your recent analysis of tech irregularities. We want you as our new director of research. Salary starts at 200,000 plus performance bonuses. We'll build an entire division around your approach." I nearly dropped my coffee. The universe had opened a door just as I closed another. 3 weeks later, I walked into Whitfield Capital's gleaming offices, my new business cards crisp in my hand. "Rebecca, Director of Equity Research." For the first time in years, my name carried the weight it deserved. Walking into Whitfield Capital for the first time felt like walking into oxygen after years of suffocation. Glass walls stretched high, polished steel glinted beneath the light, and every voice in that office hummed with urgency and ambition. But unlike Reinhardt Tech, there was no undercurrent of cruelty, no sense of posturing. When people looked at me, they looked with expectation, not dismissal. They wanted to hear what I had to say. My first assignment came quickly. A biotech company had been presented as a promising acquisition target, glowing on paper, dazzling in pitch decks. Within hours of combing through their financial statements, I recognized the same red flags I had seen in other corporate disasters. Research and development costs shuffled like a shell game, revenue projections inflated to fairy tale heights, expenses buried in subsidiaries as though truth could be hidden in shadows. During the partners' meeting, I laid my findings on the table with quiet confidence. This company is cooking their books, I said simply. My report saved the fund millions. And when Patricia announced in front of the entire leadership team, Rebecca's analysis just prevented us from making a catastrophic investment, the applause that filled the room didn't feel performative. It felt real, earned. I walked out of that meeting taller than I had in years. The timid, silenced woman Tyler and Ryan had reduced me to was gone. In her place stood someone who remembered exactly who she was, a professional who could expose corruption before it destroyed lives, an analyst whose insight carried weight. But professional resurrection didn't erase personal wounds. Every night when I returned to my apartment, the silence pressed in. No sound of keys jangling, no footsteps in the hall, no voice calling my name. I would pour myself a glass of wine, step out onto the balcony, and watch the city lights flicker like 1,000 possibilities. Yet some nights the loneliness was so sharp it cut. I thought about the girl I had been 9 years ago, the one who believed partnership meant sacrifice, who believed love meant silencing parts of herself so the other could shine brighter. That girl had been earnest, hopeful, full of faith. And maybe that faith had been beautiful, but it had also been dangerous. Because faith without respect is just submission. The Google alert about Tyler arrived on a Thursday morning while I was reviewing quarterly reports. Former tech executive Tyler Jamison, indicted on federal securities fraud charges. The headline glared from my screen, and for a moment I simply stared, breath caught in my chest. The accompanying photograph showed a woman I barely recognized. Gone were the tailored suits, the perfect hair, the commanding presence. Tyler stood outside the federal courthouse, shoulders hunched, wearing a cheap blazer that hung awkwardly from her frame. Her eyes, once so sharp and predatory, looked vacant, hunted. The charges listed beneath her photo were damning: falsifying investor disclosures, manipulating earnings reports, conspiracy to commit securities fraud. Each count carried the potential for years in prison. Her empire had fallen not from some spectacular act of revenge, but from the steady exposure of truth. For a long moment I sat in silence. I expected triumph, maybe even euphoria. Instead, what I felt was something quieter: satisfaction. Justice had been served not by me alone, but by evidence, by accountability, by the system catching up to her arrogance. Scrolling through the comments beneath the article, one line made me pause. Isn't this the same executive who humiliated that woman at the company Gala? Karma has an interesting sense of timing. Another read: I worked under Tyler. She built a culture of cruelty disguised as excellence. Glad someone finally held her accountable. I closed my laptop and exhaled. Tyler's downfall was not my victory alone. It belonged to every person she had belittled, manipulated, and dismissed. Her cruelty had not made her strong, it had made her careless. But even as justice unfolded in public headlines, my private life carried its own shadows. The divorce papers arrived one Tuesday afternoon, the envelope heavy in my hands, though the papers inside were just a few thin sheets. Ryan's signature already marked the lines that once would have been ours together. Tucked inside was a handwritten note: Rebecca, I know I can never undo the damage I caused. You were always the stronger partner in our marriage. I just wasn't smart enough to see it until it was too late. I hope you find the respect and recognition you deserve. Ryan. I read it once carefully, then folded it away. The words felt hollow after years of silence and dismissal, but some part of me appreciated the attempt. At least he had finally admitted what I had known for years. I signed my name where the lawyer indicated, each pen stroke closing the door more firmly. When it was done, I placed the pen down and sat still for a long time, letting the finality settle. 9 years reduced to signatures and silence, but also 9 years released. That evening, I poured myself a glass of wine and stood on my balcony, the city shimmering below. For the first time in years, I wasn't waiting for someone to come home. I wasn't straining to be heard. I wasn't hoping for recognition that never came. The quiet no longer cut, it soothed. Professionally, my star only rose higher. Financial publications quoted my research. Other firms tried to recruit me monthly, but Whitfield Capital treated me as indispensable. My office walls, once empty, soon filled with accolades and thank you notes from colleagues whose investments had been saved by my diligence. Yet it wasn't the awards or recognition that mattered most. It was the small daily acts of respect, the way people leaned forward when I spoke in meetings, the way Patricia trusted me with high-stakes decisions, the way my analysis shaped strategies worth hundreds of millions. Those moments rebuilt me more than any headline about Tyler's downfall ever could. One Friday evening, months after the divorce was finalized, I found myself staring at the city with a different kind of reflection. Success had given me stability, independence, even joy. But what surprised me most was what I didn't feel. I didn't feel bitterness. I didn't feel consumed by revenge. What I felt was freedom. Because the truth is, Tyler and Ryan had both underestimated me. They had mistaken silence for weakness, compromise for incompetence, patience for irrelevance. And in doing so, they had revealed the truth, not about me, but about themselves. Their arrogance destroyed them, my integrity saved me. The woman who once walked into a gala to be mocked as a pathetic gold digger, nobody was now shaping the financial future of one of the most respected funds in the city. And every time I signed my name on a report, every time my research redirected millions of dollars, I reminded myself of one lesson carved deep into my bones. Never let anyone convince you that your value depends on their recognition. 6 months after the night I walked out of my marriage, the world looked different. Not just because my career had flourished, or because Tyler's empire had collapsed, but because the woman I saw in the mirror each morning was someone I barely recognized, and yet she was more myself than I had ever been. The mornings in my apartment had their own quiet ritual. Coffee brewed in the corner of my kitchen. The sunlight spilled across the hardwood floors, and the city outside seemed to hum like a living organism, restless and alive. I would sit at my small dining table with a stack of reports, my glasses sliding down my nose, and I would marvel at how different this silence felt compared to the suffocating quiet of my old home. That silence had been filled with the weight of words unsaid, of glances avoided, of love eroding into indifference. This silence was freedom, possibility, space to breathe. And yet the scars were still there. Sometimes I'd wake in the middle of the night, heart pounding, remembering the sound of laughter echoing through that ballroom, the ripple of cruel amusement when the place card was revealed. Sometimes I'd hear Ryan's voice in my head, dismissing my career as playing around, and I'd feel the old ache of invisibility. Trauma lingers even when triumph follows. But healing isn't about erasing scars. It's about learning to wear them as proof you survived. Tyler's trial began that autumn, and though I didn't attend, I followed every report with a strange mixture of detachment and intensity. Journalists detailed her manipulations, falsified disclosures, manipulated earnings, coercion of subordinates. Witnesses spoke of the toxic culture she'd fostered, the intimidation, the arrogance. The courtroom sketches showed a woman stripped of her armor. No tailored power suits, no commanding posture, just a weary figure in plain clothes, eyes downcast, shoulders hunched. The comments from onlookers were merciless. Hard to believe this is the same woman who once strutted around boardrooms like she owned the world. What struck me most wasn't her fall from grace, but the inevitability of it. Tyler had always believed herself untouchable, and that belief made her sloppy. She couldn't imagine someone like me, dismissed, humiliated, would have the power to dismantle everything she had built. She underestimated me. And arrogance always underestimates. Ryan's collapse was quieter, but in some ways sadder. He never faced charges, but his association with Tyler tainted his name. Job offers dried up. Networking connections turned cold. He drifted from one consultancy to another, never able to regain the shine he once carried. Occasionally, I'd see him in passing at conferences on LinkedIn, once even across the street near a coffee shop. He looked older, as though the years had added a decade to his face. He tried to smile once when our eyes met, but I didn't return it. Not out of cruelty, but because that chapter had closed. One evening, a mutual friend reached out. "Ryan talks about you sometimes," she said gently. He says losing you was the biggest mistake of his life. I listened, but I didn't respond. Regret is cheap when it comes too late. Respect withheld for years cannot be repaid with a handful of remorseful words. Meanwhile, my own life was blossoming. At Whitfield, my research division became the backbone of several major investment strategies. Clients sought me out personally, and younger analysts began to treat me as a mentor. I found myself smiling at that me, the woman who had once been dismissed as quaint and flexible, now guiding others to find their strength in the ruthless world of finance. One young analyst, a woman barely out of graduate school, confided in me after a meeting. "Rebecca, I almost left this field. Too many people told me I wasn't tough enough, that I should find something less demanding. But seeing how you hold your ground, it makes me want to fight harder." Her words hit me with a wave of emotion. I thought of myself in that ballroom trembling under the weight of humiliation, and I realized that by standing back up, I wasn't just reclaiming my own dignity, I was creating space for others to believe in theirs. That realization was more powerful than any headline, any pay raise, any accolade. Still, there were moments of grief I couldn't ignore. Walking through the city at night, seeing couples hand in hand, I sometimes felt the absence of intimacy. Not Ryan, never again Ryan, but the idea of partnership. The dream we'd once shared in that university library, when we promised to support each other completely. That dream had been beautiful, even if it had died, and mourning the dream was different from mourning the man. One Friday night, sitting alone on my balcony with a glass of wine, I whispered to the empty air, "I'm still here. I'm still whole." The city lights twinkled back as if to answer. The irony was not lost on me that the very skills Ryan had belittled my attention to detail my relentless pursuit of truth. My unwillingness to accept surface appearances were the same skills that had rebuilt my life, the same skills that had brought down Tyler's empire. What they had tried to turn into my weakness had always been my strength. The media eventually moved on to newer scandals, fresher faces of disgrace. Tyler faded from the headlines, swallowed by legal proceedings and obscurity. Ryan slipped further into irrelevance, his once proud name now spoken with pity rather than admiration. But me, I was just getting started. On the one-year anniversary of the Gala, I allowed myself a moment of reflection. I stood before my mirror wearing the same green dress I had worn that night. The fabric still clung softly to my figure, the color still rich against my skin. But the woman inside the dress was different. No longer hoping for approval, no longer shrinking under someone else's shadow, no longer silent. I poured a glass of champagne, not the cheap $3 kind Ryan and I had once shared, but the kind that sparkled with authenticity. I raised it to my reflection and whispered, "To survival, to truth, to never again letting anyone write my story for me." I drank, and the taste was victory, but not the kind born of vengeance. It was the victory of becoming whole. Because in the end, it wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about destroying Tyler or Ryan. It was about reclaiming myself. The woman who had been hidden beneath years of compromise, who had been silenced by love turned cruel, who had been mocked as nobody she was here. Stronger, wiser, free. The strange thing about survival is how ordinary it feels once you've crossed through fire. People expect grand moments, a single triumphant scene, where you stand atop the ruins of those who betrayed you. But in truth, the most powerful victories come quietly. They arrive in the stillness of your own life, in the absence of fear, in the freedom of not having to explain or defend yourself anymore. It was a Tuesday morning when I realized I no longer thought about Ryan every day. I was sitting in my office at Whitfield Capital reviewing a report from one of our junior analysts when I caught myself humming softly under my breath. The sound startled me. I hadn't heard myself hum in years, not since those early days in our cramped apartment, when life was uncertain, but full of possibility. For a moment, I froze, pen in hand, listening to that small melody. It was proof that healing had threaded itself into my bones quietly, persistently, until joy no longer felt foreign. The world still whispered of Tyler now and then. She had been sentenced several years in prison, restitution payments she would never fully meet, her name blacklisted from every industry circle she had once ruled. A cautionary tale, they called her. But when I saw her photograph in the paper, head bowed as guards led her into custody, I didn't feel glee. I felt inevitability. Tyler hadn't been destroyed by me, she had been destroyed by herself. I had simply refused to let her arrogance bury me with her. And Ryan, he became a ghost in my life. I would catch glimpses of him through others. A colleague mentioned seeing him at a networking event, awkward, desperate, trying to rebuild. Another said he had moved into consulting, but his reputation made clients wary. I sometimes wondered if he ever thought of me, not the woman he humiliated, not the wife he dismissed, but the partner I once had, been the one who carried him through interviews, celebrated his every step, believed in him, with a devotion he never deserved. But wondering didn't mean longing. I didn't miss him. I missed who I used to be when I believed we were equals. And that version of myself I had finally reclaimed without him. The true climax of my story wasn't Tyler's indictment or Ryan's regret. It wasn't even my new career or financial independence. The true climax came one evening when I returned home after a long day carrying nothing but groceries and a stack of notes, and I caught sight of myself in the glass reflection of my balcony door. For years, I had avoided my own reflection, afraid of the hollow eyes, staring back the woman who had traded her brilliance for someone else's shadow. But this reflection was different. Shoulders squared, gaze steady, a woman not waiting for anyone to validate her worth. I whispered to the glass, almost like a prayer, "I see you." Because that was what had been stolen from me all along. Not my intelligence, not my career, not even my dignity in that ballroom. What had been stolen was my own sight of myself, and now it was back. The lessons came slowly, revealed in layers. I learned that silence can wound more deeply than words, that complicity is its own betrayal, that the people who laugh at you today might tremble tomorrow when the truth surfaces. But most of all, I learned that the only validation that matters is the one you give yourself. I stopped needing applause, stopped craving acknowledgement. When journalists called to quote my work, I gave them what they needed, but when the stories ran, I didn't clip them for my wall. I didn't need proof anymore. The proof was in my own life. One night, months after everything, I sat with Patricia on the balcony of her townhouse, sipping wine while the city buzzed around us. She leaned back in her chair and said, "Rebecca, I don't think you realize how many people you've inspired. It's not just about the millions your analysis has saved, it's about what you represent. A woman who refused to stay silent when others tried to erase her." Her words settled over me like a mantle, both heavy and liberating. I thought of the young analyst who told me she almost left the field of the messages I sometimes received from strangers online, who had read about Tyler's trial and remembered the story of that gala. They didn't see me as a victim. They saw me as proof that cruelty doesn't have the final word. And in that moment, I finally understood my story wasn't just mine anymore. It belonged to every woman who had ever been silenced, dismissed, laughed at, underestimated. It belonged to anyone who had ever walked out of a room humiliated and later returned stronger than the world thought possible. The night of the gala had been meant to destroy me. Instead, it became the forge where I was remade. Now, whenever I stand before a mirror, whenever I speak in meetings, whenever I sign my name at the bottom of a report that will shape millions of dollars, I carry that memory with me, not as pain, but as proof. Proof that even in the darkest humiliation, the seed of resurrection waits, if only you choose to water it with courage. To anyone listening, to anyone who has ever been diminished, I want you to hear me clearly. You are not what they call you. You are not the laughter echoing in the room. You are not the silence of those who should have defended you. You are the strength it takes to rise anyway. You are the truth they cannot bury. That is the lesson my story left me with. Not revenge, not even karma, though both came in their own way. The lesson is this: your worth does not shrink when others fail to see it. Their blindness does not make you invisible. If you take nothing else from what I've shared, take this: never ever let anyone convince you that you are small. And if this story touched you, if it reminded you of your own strength, then I ask you from the bottom of my heart, please like this video so more people can hear it. Share it with someone who needs to be reminded of their worth. Subscribe so you don't miss more stories of survival, justice, and truth. And leave me a comment below. Tell me what part of the story resonated with you most, because your voice matters here. Together we create a place where no one's laughter can drown out our truth again.